go around the room. Paul?
Some room. Paul Hogan, member of the Growth Planning Committee.
Jim?
James McMahon, ditto.
Liz?
Liz Johnson, ditto. Sorry, my video is not working.
That's okay. Lee J?
Lee J. Feldman. Lee J. Feldman, Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission.
Mary Beth?
Mary Beth Gilbert, the select board member.
Okay, great. And I think we have another guest on. I saw someone earlier who I didn't recognize.
Yeah, I'll actually mention him. I don't know where he disappeared either.
He's there.
Galen Weebly is joining us. Galen is the new director of planning for you folks, and will officially be starting on, I believe he said December 29th. So I believe Lori had asked him to join tonight so that we can start getting his feet wet.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, you're great. Good to see you. And we also have one guest in the audience, and I'd like to just thank you for joining. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we'll be happy to take your question. And if anyone else has joined since that information, please feel free to do the same. So from our agenda, it's a pretty light agenda, but it's an important one. So the first is really just approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was all the way back on May 2nd. So I'll take a motion for approval of those minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Hogan seconds.
All right. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Sounds like unanimous.
Since we don't have Janet, is anybody taking minutes? Janet took minutes for us for half a decade.
That's for, yeah. Anyone want to volunteer?
Not a very good administrative person.
Fair enough. Paul, can you take down some notes on it?
Sure.
I'd do it, but I'm not in the good position for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
The second thing on the agenda is really the primary purpose of the meeting, and that is to discuss changes to the land use ordinances based on the LD 2003 regulation. And for that, I'd like to turn that over to Lee J for the discussion. And maybe you can give us just a kind of an overview of the LD 2003. It's been a while since we discussed it.
I will. Thank you. Actually, and before we start, I just want to go back to Galen for a second. He is coming. He's been working here in Maine, and he's coming down from Presque Isle. So he is very familiar with land use law in Maine, and I think that will be a big help for you folks once he gets here and gets rolling, because then there's not a lot of learning curve to be able to get him up and going with any of this stuff. So I think that's important. And I was also part of the interview team with Lori, and we were all very impressed with him. So I think you folks will be in good hands come the end of this month.
Good to hear.
So with that, LD 2003, as Mary Beth was asking me, was approved by the legislature back in 2022. It has what I would consider three component parts to it. It can get very, very complicated, if you will. And I'm going to try to keep it as basic as possible. So the first component part, which to me is the easiest part, especially for you folks, is that there is an accessory dwelling unit requirement that says that wherever residential homes are permitted, then you shall allow accessory dwelling units either in, attached to, or standalone to your home, provided they can still meet setback requirements and the like. What you can't do is create any ordinances that would prohibit or discourage ADUs from occurring. If you look at your ADU or your accessory apartment, I think as you call it, ordinance, I didn't touch that because I read it and I know the law, and you're pretty well in compliance. Minimum, what the law says is you have to have a minimum size of 190 square feet. You do. You can establish your maximum square footage, and you already have. And then a bunch of the other things that you stipulate in there are perfectly allowed under the law. So I think from purposes of enacting LD 2003 amendments, we don't have to touch your accessory apartment or accessory dwelling unit standards at all. So that takes care of that piece. The second piece, and it's the piece that has always, it's like a math problem for me. It's always been very complicated, is this 2 to 4 unit piece, 2 to 4 home piece. So what the law now says is that wherever residential development is allowed, that you have to allow 2 units in some cases and up to 4 units. And that is really based on, do you have a public water source and a public sewer source? Now, they've defined those differently than what the state law has established under the DHS regulations. And so it gets a little touchy, but I have had some conversations with SMPDC's attorney about it. And if it's a private source, it has to be in existence and serving at least 15 homes. Otherwise, it doesn't count. But you folks have public water, public sewer. And so anywhere you have public water, public sewer, you have to allow up to 4 units on a vacant parcel. Now, in doing that, one of the things that the law doesn't get into, and a lot of towns have done, is indicate that if you have, if your lot size requirement for a single family home is, let's say, 1 acre, you can require an additional acre for each additional unit. So that you can't have 4 units unless you have 4 acres. You could have 2 units if you have 2 acres or more. But if you don't have the 4, then you wouldn't comply. That is really up to you folks as to how you establish that standard in the ordinance. Yes.
Yeah, how is that? I thought you couldn't impose greater requirements for those ADUs than you would for the underlying
We're not talking
single family
ADUs.
house.
Yeah, we're not talking ADUs here, Paul. We're talking single family homes. You're now required to allow up to 4 single family homes on a single parcel.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. If you knew how many hours we have spent in our office amongst several of us trying to dissect this law over the months, it is very complicated and very confusing.
So, for example, in our rural, we have a minimum size lot of 3 acres. So that would mean that a single parcel, 3 acre minimum size, can now have 3 houses on that parcel.
In the rural area, if you don't have sewer and water, you could only have 2.
So
So you could have a well, hold on, let me finish here. So you could have, for each house, you could still have an individual well and an individual septic system.
Yes, in fact, to me, that's I would encourage that. So that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, but so again, so in our zoning, we could
Yep.
have 3 houses on 1 parcel with 3 separate sewers and 3 separate wells.
Yes, if
Okay,
you
thank
had,
you.
yes, I'll leave it right there for now.
Thank you.
But
Yep,
yes,
thank you.
yeah.
But you would have to
Um,
meet all the setback and
Yeah, of
the
course.
DEP first
Yes,
for
absolutely.
your well and potable water and all that.
That's correct.
Yeah, which
Those
is
still have to be met.
100, which is a state, it's 100 feet. Your septic needs to be away from your well. So
That is
if you had a
correct.
3, which you could easily do on a 3 acre lot.
And remember that in this case, if you were putting 2 homes or the 3 homes, each one of those separations would need to occur for all 3. So the wells and the septic system separations would need to concur, so that if well for house number 3 encroached on the septic system for house number 1, that's not going to work. They all have to be able to meet their own standard. No different than you would look at in a subdivision of a development.
Right, but also barring, you could also consider getting a variance if depending on. I know you can get variance for that, but anyways, I mean, you could essentially, if I had a 3-acre lot, I could create my own cul-de-sac for my whole family.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay.
Yep.
All right,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
So just quick question, currently, Jim, in your neighborhood, you're
Paul Feroz.
Paul froze, yeah.
Oh, I thought it was me.
Oh, he's unfrozen. Paul, we missed your question.
Oh, so currently you could put up a single family home in Jim's neighborhood, or you could put up a 2-family home, 2 families allowed as well
Yes.
in the rural. So that essentially, there's no change in density there because he's not in a growth area. He doesn't have sewer. So for Kennebunkport, we were allowed to before, maybe the configuration is different. Here he's allowed to put up 2 separate homes. He doesn't have to follow the duplex rules, I guess. That's the difference.
That's correct. Under the LD 2003, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the density
Can I ask-
wouldn't change.
That is
So
correct. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, so that sounds correct. Okay, so for what we were just talking about, is this related to affordable dwelling units, or is this just related to any home?
Not yet.
That is the $24,000 question here, because the only affordable housing piece is the next piece that I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
There's nothing that ties or requires these multiple homes on a lot to be affordable, and there's nothing in the ADU piece that requires ADUs to be affordable. I'm kind of trying to get in the brain here of the legislators that crafted this at the time, but it's my belief that they thought that, I'm going to use the words loosely, but flooding the market with all of these additional units would bring the price down, or at least stabilize the prices of units.
So that was
There's no
poor thinking on their
affordable
part.
units in Kennebunkport right now.
So this would allow someone to actually put up to $4 million and a half condos on their 1-acre lot.
You pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much.
So can I just
I'm
go
I'm
back?
definitely not comfortable with that.
Yeah, can I go back and just, so can we just go back through 1 and 2 again before we
Sure.
go to
Jump
the-
to 3. There's a third piece.
Yeah, the 3 pages of 3, yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, so we have a growth area, we have transition area, and we have rural area.
Rural.
Any one of those areas can have, that has a single family unit on a current parcel, approved parcel lot that's with 4 single family, can now have an ADU.
Correct.
Now, where I get confused is I was reading some of the wording, and it appears that you can have, it seemed like you could have 2 ADUs.
Well, again, I'm not touching your ADU ordinance.
No, I was reading per
The
the,
state law.
yeah.
You know, I'm not sure, to be honest. Every town that I have been working with, I have not encouraged more than 1 ADU anywhere, and no one has asked that question. I suspect if you wanted to, you could allow
Yeah,
more
I
than
think
one.
when we go through the verbiage, maybe
Yeah.
I'll point out, and then maybe it corresponds to something else other than the ADU.
Okay.
Okay, and so then if you're in any of the 3 zones
Yep.
and you have a 1-family unit home, you can now put on a second unit,
Provided you have the acreage, yes.
providing you meet the current ordinance acreage for a 1 single dwelling. And then if you're in a growth area, you can put up to 4 units, also having to meet.
Having to meet the lot area for each unit.
Okay, and the setbacks and if you're not on sewer. Okay.
Correct.
Right. So before we go into the affordable thing, because that's going to take a lot,
Yeah.
just a high level question.
Yeah.
So for example, our town, I could run off a few things that we struggle with, right? So
Mhm.
we struggle with, parking, a lot of, we have a high rate of tourist seasons which flood our streets. We have a wastewater treatment plant that has limitations that if we go into a building spree, because right now it's limited by the number of permits we hand out. If we
Sure.
go over this tipping point, we're going to be, up the creek, and having to spend, I could use the word, but anyways, a lot of money
Yep.
to increase our wastewater treatments. And then, we have things like, crazy things like runoffs because we're sitting close, a lot of this,
Sure.
and, the growth zone goes right to the beaches. Okay, so saying that, there is nothing in the law that I saw that gives like thou shall increase your number of housing units by 10%. There's nothing to like when does the state legislator think that they've achieved what they intended to achieve?
Right. So there is something in the bill, and I can't remember the exact language, that establishes the need for, I want to call it each region, each area of the state, to be able to measure how many new units are created. That's both something on the town's side where, how many building permits have been issued over the last year or 2 years once this is implemented, but it also gets to who is going to track that information on a regional basis and who is going to establish that regional number. It seems that, again, that was in the law, but they haven't said regional planning agencies, you need to be responsible. It sounds like it's falling on DECD, the Department of Economic and Community Development, and their staff to track this, but they haven't established what are the parameters of numbers of units that each region should allow or encourage in order to meet their threshold. That has not been established at this point.
Yeah, because the wording was there, but there was no
Correct.
boundary conditions, there was no measurements given, and there was no statement of who was going to do what.
Correct.
So
Yep.
we
But for now, our growth permit program stays in place. There's no reason to remove it.
So let's
Mhm.
talk about that just so that there's a little bit of clarification. I didn't touch that piece, but your growth permit under the law, the LD 2003 law, you cannot impose a growth permit on ADUs.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't. We took it
Okay,
off.
so we're good there. Yeah,
Right.
you can
So,
impose
but
it
we do. Right.
elsewhere.
So we do have a breakdown in our growth area, our transitional area, and our rural area, and those at this time can stay.
Yep.
And we've got a formula in place that if we achieve a certain number, we go up by 10%.
Yep.
Right. And so
Yep.
it's
Now, I do want to go back and talk about something else, Mary Beth, that you talked about. Excuse me, is that state law also says that they can't get around subdivision law. So once you get 3 new units on a parcel, it is still a subdivision and it still has to go through some sort of review process. The other aspect of it is that, and again, this may take some tweaking on, with Galen's part, later on with you folks, but the bigger question that we've talked about in our office a lot from a theoretical standpoint is if someone comes in with a subdivision and they want to have 4-acre lots where you only require 2-acre minimum, or, I'm just throwing numbers, but then the question becomes is how does the town review that? Because there's potential for a second unit on every parcel, be it an ADU or be it a full-size home. And so that brings up traffic impacts, it brings up stormwater issues. And so it's gonna be tricky on how the town goes about regulating that, if at all. The other piece of that, I had something on the tip of my brain that I wanted to mention with that, and it slipped. But anyway, oh, no, I forgot it. It's gone. But you're gonna need to take a look at that probably at a later date, or once you get this in place and start monitoring to see what's happening, is to how are we going to further regulate this? Because that's going to take a lot more work, I think, on the ordinances to, stipulate where and when that additional review criteria comes in.
Hey, Lee,
Yes,
yeah, sticking with the ADUs. So,
yes.
your view of the ADU section is that we only are required, which we already allow, one ADU per single family home, and we're not required a greater number.
Correct.
The difference, and secondly, as I look at 4364B, the ADU section of the statute,
Yeah,
currently our accessory dwelling units or ADUs are limited where they can be, and there are some, bells and whistles around them, including that they're in the building, that there can't be a separate entrance, that there has to be a permanent resident in it. It can't be an STR. So firstly, are we required under this accessory dwelling may be constructed only, and then it lists 3 places? That's not mandatory, that we have to allow it outside the building or next to the building?
it is mandatory. But your design criteria issues can stay. That's a local issue for you folks to continue to impose. In fact, way up in Waterboro, when I was going through this with them, we got into a lot of design considerations as well, at least during the discussion. But you do have to allow under the law all 3 options.
So don't we have to change our definition of accessory apartment because it's much more limited than these 3?
I thought it had,
I don't have it. I can go dig for it.
yeah.
Accessory apartment.
So under
It's
247.1,
247.1.
accessory apartments may only be located in, attached to, or detached from a single family dwelling. So you do allow all 3.
And shall not be defined as a 2-family. Okay, so we changed that this summer to
Yes.
to harmonize.
Yep.
Okay, and then we kept our old rules on. We say only 1 per single family dwelling. That's fine. That meets the state requirement.
Yep.
We have a specific. We have a requirement about in the shoreland zone. Are we allowed to do that?
Yes, you are. In fact, the law specifically says shoreline zoning regulations shall be imposed.
Right, but that's not part of the shoreline zoning regulation. It's an overlay in the accessory apartment dwelling. It says, oh, if you happen to be in shoreland.
Well, Chapter 1000, the shoreline zoning does require any additional units, and that does include, this has been ferreted out by the AG's office during the whole process, that accessory dwelling units, you have to have the additional frontage and lot size in the shoreline zone in order to meet it in the shoreline zone.
Got it. And
Yep.
can you have if you have a duplex, two-family, a legal two-family, is accessory apartment irrelevant under state law? ADU don't apply to conforming, say, two families?
State
It's only a single
laws,
family
state law is pretty silent on that.
in
So if you
2003.
if you have something, I don't think there's any reason why you can't continue to impose that. In fact, I'm not sure we're talking the same thing, but let me give it a shot. In Arundel, when I wrote theirs, we went as far as indicating that they cannot create an HOA or a condominium association so that the second unit or the ADU would become separate ownership.
Okay.
It
Yeah, I
must
wondered about
stay
that.
with the main home.
So I was with Paul. I was wondering about that too. That was going to be my question. So just because of the ADU doesn't mean it has to be a separate title.
Correct. In fact,
okay.
it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
Which we do say that for accessory apartments, but
Yes,
I was
Yeah.
trying to understand whether an ADU was the same as an accessory apartment.
it absolutely. That's why I didn't even want to change the name with you folks, because everything you've got complies with the law, and it's one and the same. It's all in what you call it.
Okay. Well, that's good news.
Yeah. So
Hey,
let's
Lee,
jump.
can I ask, just provide a comment? And this is kind of something that you were alluding to before. It sounds like the
Yes.
state just kind of threw things out, but like with regards to the regulation, they don't have any like benchmarks that they're looking for. Is that kind of what you were alluding to?
They don't at this point, no, although they
Right.
do suggest that at some point they're going to take a look at benchmarks to determine if regions are meeting their quota, if you will, but we don't know what those numbers are.
Right, but so they must have had some kind of conversation, and maybe that your organization has a pulse on this and kind of provides feedback where, obviously I think it's a pretty good consensus that we don't want our community overdeveloped. I mean, I'm the kind of person that says if a family has a lot and they want to stay in their area and they want to grow a family multiple generations and that allows them to stay on their property to have multiple dwellings, I am all for that.
Sure.
I'm skeptic that the issues where we're gonna be bullied into conforming to this because we're scared that a developer is going to sue us. Well, I'm sure they don't make a lot of money building affordable housing, so they probably don't have a reserve to sit there and sue every single town to get their way. But I'm just curious, like, again, to go back to like, we don't necessarily want to be overdeveloped, and we certainly don't expect our community to become a metropolis. Yep. Where we also have to serve. Now we're in this position where we're serving, some kind of infrastructure above and beyond water and sewer with buses and all this other stuff, right? Which really takes away from the character of our community, which we all strive to, keep. So I'm just curious, and again, this may just be a comment that you really have to convey back to them if you do provide them feedback, that I think it's kind of vital for them to understand that, to take the considerations into, like, we have a high tourist, we have this, we do have a lot of people that come here, and we don't want to be overdeveloped, and are they going to really take that seriously in relation to maybe a rural area where it makes more sense for for people to spread out and be able to subsist and be happy and fair and where they are, instead of all in one area. So I just want to just throw that out there, and hopefully that's something that they're considering.
Hey, Jim.
I agree.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's because of home rule that there are no standards and there are no requirements. The fight went on, early rounds of this were much more draconian and much more the town shall do this. And this is, years of negotiation where it came out and it just said, well, this is this is what you're gonna have to do. You have to change your zone. But if a unit never gets built, that's up to you and your locality, as long as you don't break the state law and restrict people to, you know, you don't allow small houses, or you don't allow ADUs. So that's as far as the state was able to go. They would have loved to go a lot farther, I believe, to get more affordable housing, which was the goal. But they didn't go there because they couldn't go there. They couldn't get the votes to, you know, this was multiple years. So you'd like to see standards, but the standard would mean Kennebunkport, you have to build so many units of affordable housing, and they didn't go there. I came from New Jersey, and that's the approach they took. Every town had to supply so much affordable housing, and if they didn't do it, and they didn't zone for it, the developers could sue, and sued all the time. It was decades of lawsuits to force affordable housing projects into every nook and cranny of New Jersey, to comply with, because everybody had exclusionary zoning. You know, nothing ever got built. Poor people could never move into most towns because there was never a house that was affordable. So,
Yep. I mean, I don't have anything to add to that, Paul. Because I just don't know any more than anybody else as far as what's in the legislature's mind about looking at this. I mean, there were a lot of amendments and tweaking that was attempted this last session. Some excuse me, some came through and some didn't. But there was nothing really dealing with quotas or numbers of units or anything of that sort at this point. And I'm not sure, I mean, there was a study done and it said something like, and I think I'm close to the number, something like the state needs to build 85,000 units in the next 10 years in order to meet the demand that's needed. But they don't, as far as I know, they don't get into Southern Maine having to meet, you know, a certain number versus Northern Maine having to meet a certain number. So I think it's really based on demand.
Government
And-
should stay out of business.
Yeah.
So Lee, do we get credit? We have affordable housing already,
No, you don't.
really.
Yeah. There's
Credit for
nothing in
what?
the law that there's nothing in the law that gives communities credit for already providing affordable housing.
Okay, so we have, Jim, we have the Heritage Trust on School Street. And now we have new houses, so they haven't built them yet though, Lee. So the new ones being built, we'll get credit for those.
well, they're not counting, so it's irrelevant.
Right.
They're not
Right.
what?
They're not counting. So it doesn't
No,
matter.
no, no, but I mean, if the state comes back and says, hey, I want to see your building permits for affordable housing, not that they have a measurement, we can hand over the Beechwoods Heritage Trust houses that are going to be built once they get planned, right?
Put units in.
My assumption would be that, sure, they're gonna look at that and consider that if you've already got affordable housing coming in. But for this, the fact that this new law requires much higher densities for affordable housing developments than what you currently allow. And I don't know if that is, you know, this, if you've already approved a project and they're coming in.
No,
with,
actually, this is an interesting point because
Yeah.
we do have built projects we have houses with people
Sure.
living there. And it's actually, I was wondering where the Heritage Trust got their numbers from for income. And then when I read the 2003 law, I'm like, oh, there's where the Heritage Trust got their income levels. Because personally, I thought the income levels should be lower if we were talking about affordable housing, but put that aside.
Right.
So now we have a Beechwood on a street here. There's town gave them land,
Yep.
Heritage Trust, and they just got clear title, and now they're gonna start working with the developer. So they, in essence, could
Yeah, I mean, if they haven't, timing is interesting, but if they haven't,
They
gotten
haven't
their
gotten approved
approvals,
plans. Nope.
right.
They haven't gone for approvals yet.
and you folks, does your select board approves this? This doesn't have to go to town meeting, does it, or does it?
No, actually the select board doesn't have to approve it.
Okay,
The select board, it goes through the normal town process now, so,
okay,
you know,
so,
the trust
um,
is separate. The trust is like a developer.
yes. Well, I'm talking about the ordinance amendments.
Oh, okay,
Um,
yeah.
If the ordinance amendments, if you folks have to, technically the
to,
law,
yeah.
they have to go to town meeting.
Yep.
Yes.
So whenever your town meeting is when these new standards would be approved, if the town voters approve them. That's when they would go into effect. If the trust comes in before then and seeks approvals for their project, then they don't have to meet the 2.5 times standard that's in the law, because your law hasn't been put into place yet. And the law says that you have until technically July 1 of 24 to have those put in place. So whenever your town meeting is, if it gets approved,
June.
June. So that's when the law would take effect in Kennebunkport.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. I don't know if that was clear as mud.
No,
but-
it is clear. I was just going off of, trying to get some extra credit here for the town.
Sure, I get it.
so-
Yep.
Lee,
Yep.
can you
I'm
give
sure we
that,
could encourage them. We can encourage them to follow the ordinance that will likely be approved, hopefully be
It'll be-
approved. Right.
I hate to say it, but well, I think they would probably be very pleased if you suggested that, because
Yeah.
now you're talking about, 2.5 times the base density of whatever zone is, which is a lot more units
Yeah.
potentially for them.
If it's in a
Dan-
growth area, is that growth
Correct.
area or is that,
Beechwood, it's
They're-
past they growth,
they're not on sewer on Beechwood, are they?
no, they're
No.
not sewer.
Then they can't meet
They're
the
not, yeah,
standards.
well, but they're within 1,000 feet, but I'm not exactly sure where that is.
So here's an interesting thing, Lee, and then I'll
Yep.
stop because I don't want to hold you up anymore. But this is affordable housing though. So, okay, we don't meet the density, but it is affordable housing, meaning that, the affordability in this thing said it had to be until 30 years, like
That's
30
correct.
years.
That's correct.
Ours goes like 99 years.
Yep.
Right, because of the
And-
lease.
And also, it meets the income requirements that are
Yep.
in this LD 2003. It doesn't meet the density.
Right.
So does it have to meet all, or can it be some?
It has to meet all if they want the density requirement, which is really the carrot for the developer. That you, developer, have to make 51% of the units in that development, not the whole development, just 51% of the units in that development affordable under the affordable housing definition. And you have to certify them with, this is a whole other issue, but probably with Maine State Housing would hold the I don't want to call them deeds because they're not deeds, but the agreements
Yeah.
on those units. And that way Maine State Housing would track it and make sure that every time a unit turns over that was part of that 51% affordable housing unit, that it stay affordable.
For how long? The 30
30
years? thing?
years, 30 years.
Not
Yep.
long.
Well,
Yeah, that's not long. That's 1.5 generations.
but it also takes into account market dynamics then, and that might have been, I'm just assuming that was one of the, trade-offs between the
Yeah, it's just a trade-off.
lawmakers.
Lee,
Yes,
Lee, isn't the affordability piece, isn't that the standard for USDA, the time frame for rural
Yes.
development and some of
Yes.
these affordable housing developments?
yes. Thank you, Galen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a standard. That whole affordability and time frame issue is a standard within the industry that is coming from federal government.
Okay, so our current Heritage Trust has a tougher standard.
Yes.
So so towns are obligated to do this, like, we couldn't.
I'm sorry, I'm just kind of chuckling because as I'm at the top before everybody came on, I was mentioning to Mary Beth that just the other day, a brand new council was seated in Cape Elizabeth, who had just put the regulations in place, and the new council has come back and taken them out and said, you know, we don't want them. So what was done has been undone. I can also tell you somewhat firsthand, I do a lot of work with the town of Ogunquit. They were actually the first town in the area that wanted me to draft their regulations for them, and I did. They took them to town meeting last spring because we knew at that time that, you know, and there was no extension discussed and everybody needed to have things in place. And it went to the voters and it was defeated. And the common discussion that was coming out of that was that folks from town were saying, this is not who we are and this is who we do not want to be. The law does not have any stick with it, so that, you know, what is the incentive for putting it in place? And if you don't, what's going to happen? Well, there's nothing in the law that says what will happen, other than the fact that there may be lawsuits if a developer wants to do that type of a development in your town and you don't have your regulations in place. And I see Galen has his hand up.
So Lee, I'd like to gather what your thoughts are. Again, if the town would like to explore this, but I believe it wasn't Portland that put a sprinkler requirement for ADUs.
I'm sorry, what, did you say a sprinkler requirement?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if Portland has done that or not. I have not followed Portland's regulations at all.
We've been having conversations at Grow Smart Maine, and I thought that was their workaround to, they're still in compliance with what the law says, but they put an extra requirement that basically makes it not it's cost prohibitive. There's only a few sprinkler companies in the area, and it's a way to stop these types of unwanted ADUs in certain parts of the community.
Interesting. Yeah, I have not heard that.
Well, I'm all for ADUs. Like what the Housing Trust is doing is great. And those are going to last as affordable housing even longer. But what's to prevent somebody who lives on, 4 acres from building additional units and renting them out as Airbnbs every week, or someone from buying a house on several acres, never intending to live there, tearing it down, building 4 units and renting them out as short term? Like this town would be ruined.
So that certainly would take quite a bit more amendments and work in your ordinance. You can of course require a short-term rental ordinance to be more restrictive in that case. You can indicate, as I mentioned at the top as well. I don't know if you were on at that point, but so if people are going to want to build, a second or third home on their property, the ordinance should be set up so that for each home on the property, you have to have the additional base acreage. So if the base zone is a 3-acre zone,
Yeah.
if you want a second home, you have to have 6 acres in order to meet that requirement. But
So wouldn't now, I mean, when we've made changes like this in the past, people have driven trucks through them. There's a big development near me that never would have happened had we had not made a code change that allowed a certain kind of construction to try to get affordable housing, and instead we got a big resort. So I'm very concerned about what we do and say, oh, we'll come back later and fix it, when we have an opportunity now to think about this and put in the protections that we would all agree. So if we're saying you need 3 additional acres for that second home, now would be the time to do it, not after it's happened 5 times.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I didn't touch that issue in my amendments for you, simply because I hadn't worked with you folks. I didn't know
Right, of
what your
course, we
thoughts or
understand.
discussion was. What I don't want to pass the torch, because I think I'm gonna be pretty much done with you folks come the end of the month, but that's why Galen's on the call to hear these things. I think that's a continued discussion and work with him once he starts to get those ordinances in place with all of these other above and beyonds than what I've provided, which is really just the base part of the regulation.
So, yeah,
We-
that's a good point. And one concern I have is it's self-imposed deadlines that the town has put on ordinances. That
Yep.
thou shalt have it final ordinance provided on January 5th.
Yep.
I
So
talked
that
with,
gives us
yeah, I talked
little
with Lori
time.
about that, Dan. And I think, you know, really I think the issue for this one is that we're gonna have to have a lot of public sessions.
sure.
And then we have to write the warrants. April, we have to have the meetings 60 days before or whatever, and then we write the
Right.
warrants in April. So, you know, we may get a little bit more time if we loop back to Lori than January 3rd. As long as we're making, I think the intent here is to make some steady progress.
Do
But
you
I think-
folks
So-
do you
so
folks
one-
hold? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, one of the pieces, I think, I mean, we've got the auxiliary part of the 3 pieces of LD 203. We have the auxiliary apartment piece covered. So we're good there.
Except that we haven't changed. I'm still confused, and maybe you answered it, and I've probably already forgotten it, Lee. But we have to allow it in an additional building, and we don't say that.
We said detached. I
So-
think.
You do. It says detached.
Oh, you're
Detached.
right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we got 1 out of 3 covered.
Absolutely. Yep.
I think the second one, the one that we're talking about, where you could
Yeah,
allow
hold
all
on,
this
Hold
extra.
on. So how do we handle the dwelling must have 1 front entrances, and all other entrances must be on either side or in the rear of the building? That's while we made the change in the intro language, I don't think we made the necessary change inside to contemplate, well, you've got a second building. You obviously can't have 1 front door. You have to have 2 doors. You need 1 door for each building. We handled the size. That's great. But I don't think we handled the continuous roof. And how do you get in this building?
So we're still on the ADU part, Paul?
Yeah, we're
Yeah. Here's what I'm thinking, Paul, because even if we were to give, in order to try to be compliant with this LD 2003, I think those kind of things we might be able to handle afterwards, because we're limiting, we're not gonna add like 2 or 3 ADUs to a site, right? We've kind of set it at 1, and that's what it is. And I think we need to make those modifications in order to be fully compliant, but I think we're in pretty good shape there. I'm really
I'm
concerned
not-
about the one we're talking about now.
I'm not voting for this, and I'm only 1 vote, but when we
Yeah.
have issues that are out there, I am not gonna be the one to say, oh, well, we goofed, and look what happened, developers, it took us 3 years to do this, and in the interim, look what happened. We should identify the issues that are raised by this change and work expeditiously to try to make the ordinance, I mean, the code work. So,
I agree.
I
And
don't
Dan, I
disagree,
think,
but
sorry, Dan, I think the way this could actually work is we get the heavy hitter stuff in for starting the discussions with people. And then, like
Mhm.
Paul said, the cleanup stuff can then go in to work also, and everything meets up for the vote, for the warrant. And it meets up for the town meeting. But it
Well-
won't, those things won't be as hard to explain to people as like the ADU, the guts of it, the guts of the house.
yeah, I don't disagree, Mary Beth. I'm just concerned about the timeline. Because haven't been involved in this for the last 19 years. It's very slow,
Mhm.
right, to make a change. And then the second thing that we're talking about is a huge change that's gonna get a lot of folks nervous and upset. And I don't see even how that's gonna get passed in June.
What exactly is
I'm
gonna
not
go
even sure.
for the voters in June? What question?
The
Well,
whole, the
whole
whole,
thing.
whatever changes we
every change we
we
make.
propose to the Board of Selectmen that they sign on to, that they then recommend to go to voters.
hey, Lee, I'm
Yes,
just gonna, given the conversation we're having right now,
yep,
and given Algonquin and Cape Elizabeth and what Galen had said that they had done in other
Sure.
areas.
yep.
Would it be feasible or acceptable to put in, like Dan said, the easy stuff first for the June vote? And
So
get the
that's what
ADU stuff done?
that's what I wanted to ask was, if you folks do a, fall supplemental town meeting at all, or have
We
you
do
done
a
that before?
November meeting, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so what I would recommend is get in place what we can, now. But knowing that Galen's coming on, that you go right to town, working with him on additional amendments and additional language to have it ready to go in November. I have done a number of these updates with towns, and I have not seen any town getting overrun with people coming into town wanting permits. I
So
mean,
we have a very, so we just, well, I don't know how I should say this. I'm not gonna say it. So I would say it maybe this way. We do have the 2 meetings. ADU is something that I think the risk is if we try to do ADUs, 2 to 4, the 2 to 4 houses and number 3, which we haven't gotten, well, we touched on a little bit, the affordable housing all together, one of those 3 or 2 of those 3 could kick this thing to a no vote, and then we get
Sure.
nothing.
sure.
So I don't know what the rest of the people feel like, but the ADU thing seems like something that would help our residents achieve more spaces. We have the Heritage Trust that we're already moving out on. And at least we get that to the June. We can think about this. Dan, I'm looking
Mhm.
for you to.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree. I think that's really, would go to the Board of Selectmen. Are they willing to take that risk that we wouldn't be technically compliant with the state regulation by their deadline of July 1? Which was
So
a
Lee,
ridiculous.
what is
it was
that?
actually-
Lee, what's
yeah.
your guidance on what Dan just said?
So a couple of things that I'm thinking is that on the ADU, Paul certainly raised a concern with design criteria, if you will, for the standalone unit. I might be able to, in short order, unfortunately, tomorrow I'm at a meeting all day outside my office, and I might be able to get a crack at it on Friday. Would come up with a little bit of language that I can slide in here that would indicate that freestanding ADUs shall also comply with certain design criteria as established in the primary home requirements, something to that effect. The 2 to 4 unit is, as I said at the onset, to me is the most complicated piece to get and understand. And the affordable housing development piece, I think is less complicated to understand, and the language is pretty standard that I've put in place for you folks.
Mhm.
I would say that a tweak to the ADU and the affordable housing development would work pretty quick, and it's pretty straightforward. I do agree with Dan that the 2 to 4 issue is very complicated and is going to get people thinking, well, what's going to happen next door to me? Or if so and so has 10 acres of land, are they going to put 2 more houses out there? I think that's going to take a little bit more time and work for you to get it right, if you will, for allowing things to happen the way they're supposed to under the law and having people understand
Mhm.
what they can and can't do. That's my thought. So it would be, let's try to get the ADU piece cleaned up a little bit. I think that's a short order thing, and try to get the affordable housing development piece put in place, or at least proposed to your voters for spring.
And the affordable housing point, to go back to Liz's point, that 51%
Of the units.
is 30 years, and then after 31 years, people can be,
They can be affordable. They can be whatever the market.
Unaffordable again.
Yeah, whatever
Could be
the
the $1
market
million
rate
little
bears.
homes.
That,
Whatever
to
the
me, that
market
just
rate
seems
bears.
so short-sighted. That,
But
that
that's,
we're gonna allow all these built, homes to be built, and it'll solve a problem temporarily, but for our kids and our kids' kids, then we're just way overcrowded with multi-billion-dollar homes.
yeah, I think this is like, I think Jim brought it up too. This density thing, you change the look and feel,
Yeah.
and then you go right back to Liz's point in 30 years, 31 years from now, where,
Yep. Yep.
And
Well,
we're
at least-
Miami.
At least these
It's
are,
really
these
what
would be,
side of
de-
the, really
yeah,
kind of what
at least
side of
these
the
would be
fence you're on.
developments.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking at somebody that has money can build a big house, or it's somebody that thinks like me, where if I have 8 acres and I want to provide for my kids and have them build a house, or their kids build a house, you can call it whatever you want. They can build whatever they want. They build $1 million house, they can build it, but they're still next to me, and I want my kids around and to be part of this community. But hey Lee, I just want to ask you this, because if we're gonna kind of go with your game plan here and get some some things in play,
Yep.
do you have a sense or a pulse based on the other communities or statewide? I don't know if this is kind of a stall tactic that maybe would benefit us. Do you have some information or literature or something that we can get that says, like Cape Elizabeth, they decided, nah, we're just not going to do anything. We're just going to take our chances, and we're happy the way we got it. Or Algonquin's like, we're happy the way we got it. We're going to keep it the way ours. We're just going to take our chances.
Yep.
Do you have a sense of like the number of communities or towns or whatever that are taking that same approach, that will allow, say, me as a member to talk to town people to say, we're taking this seriously, but you got to understand that this is the kind of thing that was put in front of us. There's a lot of towns that aren't necessarily feeling threatened. They don't feel like they have to be pushed into a corner to do this. Is there any information that you can, kind of put together to provide to us that we can just at least begin to share with people on that?
Yeah. So a couple of things. From our district, which is all of York County and Southern Oxford County, I've been tracking every town as to what they're doing and where they're at. Some of them I've worked with, and some of them we haven't. So I have some of that data available in a spreadsheet form that I could certainly share with you folks. The Galen might even be able to jump in here, having been up in Presque Isle, but I do know there's a smattering of towns throughout the state that are saying, we're just not going to do it. Wells is not in any hurry to be putting anything in place at this point. And I suspect there are other towns up in Lincoln County and Washington County that, it's not on the top of their food chain for getting this stuff in place, and they're not pursuing it. Galen, have you heard any more on that?
Yeah, I've been dealing with this in Presque Isle. My chairman of my board does not want to implement the regulations. The planning board is mixed in Presque Isle in implementing it, or ignoring it or fighting it. It's in the county. Again, a lot of the other towns are a lot smaller. They don't have full-time planning staff, so they're probably ignoring it, or they don't know about it right now. So it's a mix.
I think you can get the sense that we all want to be proactive about it, but I think it'd be helpful to have like maybe a little ammunition to say like, we're proactive and we're prepared to take things serious and talk to the community about it, but not everybody's really interested in doing this, and this is the con, and we might be able to live with that.
Well, and we need more time. This is a really big, potentially hugely impactful law that could make or break our town. And if and there's parts of it that seem okay, and there's parts of it that don't at all.
Yeah.
So I think
Agreed.
we need a lot of time to nitpick it and pull it apart. And for the affordable housing piece, sure, if there's only X number of developable areas in Kennebunkport, and a developer wants to buy them to develop, and we have an ordinance in there that says that 51% has to be affordable, quote unquote, affordable.
Well, they don't have to build it. They don't have to build it as an affordable.
Right.
They're allowed to build it as a high end, whatever they want to do, but they're allowed to make it an affordable in order to get this high density.
Right.
Right. I mean, if you allow multifamily developments in any of your zones, I mean, a developer
which
can
we
come in
do.
and do a market rate apartment complex or condo complex flats anytime they want. The question is
I think the 30-year thing would have to be a lot longer, like the Housing Trust is doing. But then the dwelling component, that's a whole different story.
Right.
And I would think that there would have to be huge restrictions on of how those would be used. Otherwise, literally, people are going to just put an accessory dwelling on their property, if not 3 or 4, if they can, based on the acreage, and rent them out. I mean, long-term, not long-term, short-term profit.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm seeing it happen, just in neighbors already.
So if we just go back to what Liz was talking about, but there's 3 components, right? So I think Liz just put 1 and 2 together. 1 is the ADUs, 1 per single family. Right. So that I think actually, well, we'd have to talk.
But what's the purpose of those? What in this law, in this ordinance are they saying is the purpose of building those?
In our town,
not week by week?
No, in our town, they cannot be a short-term rental, and they have to be the primary occupant of the ADU or accessory apartment has to be here 6 months of a year.
Indefinitely, not
indefinitely.
Your limit or
and it follows the.
So the only change is just that it can be in a separate building now, so it affords the property owner a little more flexibility.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got that first part covered. We just need to address the detached building and how
design criteria.
So so it
Yeah.
can be
Well,
built.
The change
then
is
we'll-
that everyone can get an ADU.
Right.
That's the change, right?
Well,
Well,
let's
you
be
are-
honest with you, if a house is $1 million, who can afford that? If I had the opportunity to build an accessory dwelling and rent it out to supplement my mortgage, I probably would. I'm just saying that from my perspective or opinion.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
That's our
It's
our
so
current,
expensive.
our current law allows you to do that.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
right,
Jim,
exactly.
except that you have to do it in your building. And you can't do a short-term rental.
But
Right.
remember, June 13th of 23, just this past June, it was changed.
Right.
And it's allowed, it is already allowed as detached.
Right, I'm sorry, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
we just
that
have
was
to,
just from June, so.
right. So there's really nothing we need to do on that piece other than to fix the design criteria to allow that detached building and put in some verbiage on what it can look like and what the entrance would be and so forth.
Correct.
Right. So I think we got
And I know
that
you
one
don't-
covered.
Yeah, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm very concerned as we put up these extra buildings and we didn't talk about it. Well, we did talk about it. We've been talking about it for 10 years about the drainage, the surface water problems we are having in my neighborhood and in others with properties that are not part of proper subdivisions, having no drainage requirements, surface water drainage requirements, and dumping literally, gallons and gallons. Maribeth knows. Maribeth is is on our
Recipient.
road committee. Yeah, Maribeth's a recipient. She's on the road committee, and her thing and her road and her neighbors are getting. Her neighbor now has a flooded backyard as a result of this dumping from above. So if we're allowing a new building, and I know we did this since July, but not requiring any thought about drainage and surface water containment, we are not facing reality. We're doing what we've been doing forever, and we're not facing the reality of
Yeah, so-
intensification of development, crowding of our neighborhoods. And this
So,
law
yes,
is,
so we have to deal with that on a residential dwelling unit as well, right?
Yeah, does that go?
When it's not in a development.
when it's not a development.
Right. So that's something we should just take up and deal with anyways.
Yes.
As
Absolutely.
a separate point. But I think to try to get back to how do we get through and what are we going to propose to the voters in June at all associated with LD 2003. And then so my thought is we make those corrections to the detached ADUs so that they can be built. I don't think there'll be a whole bunch of them built before we deal with the whole issue of water control and so forth. I think we table the second one. Then to be proposal, but honestly, that goes to the Board of Selectmen to make that decision whether we go forward, and they may want to talk to legal about the potential ramifications. And then the third one, I think, is a possibility to do, because that's all around the development. It's all around our growth areas. It has to be on sewer, has to be on city water, if I recall
Mhm.
correctly.
No,
So that's limited, right? Within our town, available town property to develop that. And I think that we have an opportunity to possibly get that forward.
so can I
um,
just test that really quick, Dan? Does
Mhm.
it,
Absolutely.
so does it have to be on sewer?
As what
I
have to
think
be
it
on
could-
sewer?
The affordable housing, number 3.
Affordable housing developments,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
they can only be on sewer or water, excuse me, and in your designated growth area where water or sewer exists.
Okay, then
If you want the density, if you want the
Yes,
density.
correct.
Right.
If you just want to
Exactly.
build a garden apartment complex,
Wherever they're allowed in the town is by zoning is where they
By
those
zoning,
can go.
right. Right. So our normal zoning would qualify if you don't go for this development piece. Is that correct? Lee? Leroy?
Can
If
you say
our-
that again, Dan?
So if a developer wants to build homes but doesn't want to take advantage of the affordable housing density process.
Correct, yeah.
He's gonna have to go to our normal requirements,
Oh,
normal
absolutely.
subdivision, all the rest.
That's right, that's right.
It's only
And-
if he chooses to do an affordable housing development where 51% or more of the homes are affordable, does he get that density bonus, et cetera? And then it has to be on
yes, and
city sewer.
it would still have to go through the planning board as
So
part
go
of,
through the planning board.
yep,
Right.
yep, as any review process, but
Right.
those are only allowed with the higher densities in the areas where there's sewer and or water and designated in your growth area.
And that 1 acre example doesn't apply, like the example I said, you got a 3 acre minimum size lot, you can break it into 1 acres each and have 3 separate wells and sewers. Excuse me, septic.
For an affordable housing development, no, the
Okay.
developer in this case is more concerned about if you have a 1 acre zone, you know, they're gonna get 2.5
Yep.
times the density.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
Yep, yep.
So just
Um,
really quick, sorry,
yeah.
but let's go back to the wells. So if I go into the 7-15 that you added in, and if I
Ye-
go, so this is affordable housing density, so this is item number 3, right?
Yes,
And if I go to section D, water and wastewater,
yep.
item 2 says if a housing unit is connected to a septic system. I thought we said we want to be, so is
Yeah,
it,
we can take that out.
okay, so we don't, so we can make sure it always has to be on sewer.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah, I can delete that. That's easy.
okay.
Yeah. What I was thinking for clarity actually is whether or not, instead of trying to make these changes into the different sections of the ordinance, do we put in a affordable housing development section that has these details?
Isn't that what 715 is?
That's what 7.15 would be, yes, for the
Okay.
affordable housing development.
So even the definition of an
You-
affordable housing development, to include that in that section, have it all in the parking requirements associated with that, to put that all in that
So
one section.
You're talking about one section of an ordinance that would address all of these things.
All of the affordable, that third part, that affordable housing development piece. Does that make sense?
It is definitely a way to do it. What I was trying to do was just plug it into your current structure, but it could be done in that respect.
Okay, the only other piece, if we left it in the current structure, which I think also could work, I think we still have to like reference that specific change within that structure is applicable only to affordable housing development.
I think that language is already in there.
Is it there? Did I miss
Yeah.
that?
It's in
Okay.
715.
Yes.
And I think you have all those other sections kind of work where they are. You have to like
Okay,
duplicate a lot of the rest of the code into here,
Yes.
which everybody already knows where to go to look for those other sections. 715 is just 7 is entitled what? Special zoning areas or something like that. the-
7 is performance standards for specific activities, land uses, and zones.
Right. So that's
Yep.
why you popped
Yep.
it in there.
Correct. I want to go back just to show you what I can do fairly quick order on the ADU issue is, excuse me, I can stick in some language that talks about standalone detached accessory units shall also meet the design criteria, and I'll continue that along and put that in there so that they have to meet the criteria as the primary home would have to meet with the access points and roof line issues.
Mhm.
And then I would add an H at the bottom that says any new accessory unit that expands the structure or standalone unit shall provide a stormwater analysis as part of the permitting process.
Perfect.
So Dan, to your point on,
Well, do they have to meet any standards, Lee, or they just provide an analysis? I mean, it just goes to, it doesn't go to the planning board, it just goes to
It just
Galen.
goes to staff, yep. And if the stormwater comes back and says that they need to provide a pond, because they're adding enough, CFSs, or impervious area to that, excuse me, to that location, then part of the process is gonna be that they're gonna be required to construct that pond. And I can expand that language to say something to that effect.
Okay.
We have that language elsewhere, but it's been ignored and not been strong enough to ever be relied upon. So it does contain the language that suggests, you know, any displacement caused by your construction, you can't push downstream to the next guy.
Right.
I forget that section. I can find it for you if you want, but it's essentially that language that, you know, that's the standard. Keep the new stuff on board. You're not responsible for upstream.
Correct.
You're not responsible for, okay, that's great.
Yep, yep.
So we'd want to add something similar to that to the 7.15, right? The affordable housing density area.
Yes.
So that would be a caveat to, you know, how much could actually be put into a space.
715 already has the regular subdivision rules,
Correct, and
And-
they have to
and-
abide by subdivision.
which has a state stormwater standard. So if you're doing a subdivision and it's affordable housing, you're still doing a subdivision.
Okay,
So
So
you gotta,
so E sends us back to the subdivision requirement.
that's correct.
Our
Yep,
current ones cover that.
yep.
Okay,
We got you covered on that one.
okay.
Okay, so I can, probably Friday, I will make those couple of changes and I will get those back into April so that she can include them for the next planning board meeting. I will also, or Mary Beth, you'll probably be communicating with Lori, I would assume, and let her know what your thoughts are on the 2 to 4 unit issue.
Yeah,
I'm assuming-
I'll meet with her with Dan.
It might come better from you than from me.
Yeah, I'll meet with her with Dan. And
Okay.
we'll talk through
Okay,
where we both, you know, what we collectively have heard from everybody.
sure.
The
Sounds
only-
great.
The only other final thought I had is, you know, do we want to give credit to our legislature in like the definition and a few other things to say, you know, per LD 2003, here's the definition of affordable housing, per LD 2003, here are the requirements from a GPC standpoint. You guys want to do that, or do we want to own this?
you mean credit blame?
No, well, credit, right? I mean, let's give
Yeah.
credit
Yeah.
where credit's due. You know, there was a lot of communication with us from our representative about what our thoughts were.
Yeah, Representative Gear was very involved in
Yeah.
this language.
Yeah.
In this bill, yep.
Being a little facetious there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna say, what? But I think, yeah, and if you could get back, I can't remember who asked, if it was Lori or somebody, or Dan. Any more information from you and Galen on what towns?
Yeah, I can get you my spreadsheet. I'll send it to April. It's probably the easiest for me to do, all right? Or I can send it to
Yep.
Lori, which shows you what all of the towns in York County are doing at this point, or what we've heard they're doing. Whether it's that they're going forward, or they haven't done anything, or they've already put something in place.
I would just
because there's-
say, I would just say on the 2 to 4 family, I would think if we met in early January, we could probably, if we wanted to, you know, now that we've begun to identify the concerns and issues, do the same kind of discussion on 2 to 4 family. From what I've heard, the issues raised, you know, seem to be how much land is required.
Mhm.
Do we have are we going to make the requirement additional? So for Jim's kid, he just has to have another, if he's got a 6-acre lot, that's fine. He can do 3 and
Right.
3 and he can do that. The short-term rental one, I'm less concerned about because of, we have the short-term rental ordinance in town, which has a cap. So nobody can go and build a house next to them and expect that it's going to be a rental because there just aren't any slots open. They would have to stand in line. I don't know what's the waiting list, but that's a self,
Regulating.
you know,
Yeah.
that I was against that when it was coming forward, but now that we have LD 2003, it's nice that it's there.
Yeah.
So that concerns me less. But anyway, I don't know, and whether there are other issues.
Yeah, I think
You
I
know,
agree with you, Paul. We
the
can take
drainage
these up.
issue is
Part of my thought
first
is,
week in January.
part of my
Hey,
thought
Paul-
is back to what Liz said, there's so much here, you know, and we try to go to the June vote with so
Yeah, no, I
much.
understand. People
um,
don't like change.
and then then everything goes, and then, you know, then we try again. And I'm thinking, you know, do we pick a few that we think would be beneficial? You know, and that's up to this committee. And you know, take an initial step.
Yeah.
You know.
Can I ask one
versus-
question?
'cause I could just,
Yeah, one question on the third piece, the affordable housing. Our village parcel, which is a controversial topic in town. We haven't talked about that and the implications. So is that what zone is that in growth wise? Maribeth, you know?
that's
Dan,
in the
you
growth zone.
It's in the growth zone. So we could have an affordable housing project there with high density.
Yeah, and that was part of the survey, right? So that was
Got it.
on
Okay.
that survey that came out, was one of the questions about, you know, that.
Well, ironically, 75% of the people who answered that survey said they wanted to leave it natural.
Right.
Yeah, and so this is where, you know, this is where we get into, you know, and the results of the November election were interesting, right? Because then I would have bet money that the McCabe property wasn't gonna go yes for sale, but it did. And so that's how, you know, tax conscious, you know, our residents
Sure.
are. And so we want, you know, we want to be mindful of so many things here. And this one, I agree with everybody. This one is a hard pill to swallow across all three. I mean, they went big on this, you know, and because there's, and the problem is now we're going to have people saying, well, Wells doesn't do anything, Ogaton would cut out, you know, I mean, so this is a hard thing to then try to go and put through when you have surrounding towns already, you know, turning this over. And this, so then how do you say, well, we need to, you know, you know, so this is why
We start creating a coalition against it with other
Yeah.
towns.
Yeah.
Well, I
yeah,
think there's probably ways to incorporate it or pieces of it. I mean, I think we're all in agreement that we don't want our town to be overdeveloped. So if there are
Yeah.
ways to incorporate parts of it that enable any future development, whether it's for affordable housing or year-round rentals, and for the multi-million-dollar homes that people just want to build, if there's a way to have control over that to the benefit of everyone who lives in town who wants to keep it a charming, quaint, underdeveloped town.
Good.
So I think we just need to be clever about what parts we use, how we use them, not be short-sighted, like the 30-year piece. And let's plan it so that this town is still what it is today, for our great-grandchildren.
Hey,
I think that's what people want.
Lee, what leadway do we have on item 2? So, for example.
What's item 2?
Item 2 was the 2 to 4
The
homes.
2 to 4.
So, for example, what we talked about tonight was what Jim put on. Got 6 acres, houses for the kids. They're on 2-acre lots. That's not really going to change the look and feel. But you go into our port, into our growth area, which is designated growth area, and now you say, I have a single family dwelling, or I can basically put 4 units in there. So that's where.
Yeah.
You could only put the 4 units or the 4 homes, because they're not internal units, they're not additions to the home, they're freestanding homes in this case. And you could only put them on your lot, again, if you have whatever the lot, we need to tweak the wording, but whatever the lot size requirement is, if it's a 2-acre lot, that each unit shall have the lot acreage requirement of that zone. So each unit would need to be supported by an additional 2 acres.
So the problem we have village, so Paul asked the question of the village parcel, that's in the village residential, and it's also growth area. In town, village residential, but a lot of things are out of spec, right? They're all against the current ordinance of size.
Yeah.
So does
conforming.
everyone become grandfathered? And then how does that work with this new 2 to 4?
They could only do the 2 to 4, again, if they have the acreage to support it. So if someone had a non-conforming lot or a smaller lot than the minimum lot size, for example, what they have is what they have. They can't add anything to that. They could only add if they had multiple acres and were able to meet the additional lot size requirement or density for the additional unit.
They could only do an ADU, in other words.
Correct. Because ADUs, we can't require any of that for them.
It couldn't be a detached ADU because that would increase the nonconformity.
Only if they can't meet the setbacks. Again, they could do a detached ADU.
Yeah.
If they can meet the setbacks, because we cannot impose density or lot size requirements on them.
Oh, I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
I assumed that if it was non-conforming already because it's a 40,000 square foot lot and I already am over the percentage, you're saying I'm allowed 1 more unit.
Right. The law says you can't impose any greater restrictions on that.
So
even though it's non-conforming now.
Correct. Correct.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
so if we talk about like how our town look would change, right? So with number 1, ADUs, on non-conforming lots, as long as they meet setbacks, and we could have within our village, within the port itself,
Yep.
where we have all non-conforming lots, we could have all these little ADUs popping up.
Sure. Stuffed in the corner as long as they meet the setbacks.
Okay, and then
Yep.
if we go to item 2, which is the 2 to 4 home edition, now that has to meet current. guidelines.
Those are gonna be in the transitional or rural areas.
Okay, yeah, so wherever we have non-conforming lots, we're not gonna go to 2 units or 4 units. That's gonna be more to what Jim was using as an example.
Correct.
All right, well, that's actually not as bad as I was thinking then, because then I was thinking like a house downtown was gonna become 2 to 4 houses because it was in the growth area.
No, not unless they had the acreage to be able to do it.
Okay. All
And you
right.
can
It's
pop a
the-
tiny house in next door.
Can
Right.
Paul, so are you suggesting we meet in the beginning of January to start talking about this?
If we want to, I mean, we have to finalize whatever we want to recommend.
Do we have,
so
so I was just gonna suggest this, if, I mean, there's a lot of what if questions and like the more and more everybody comments and stuff, like just for my own benefit, I'm gonna wanna like have all the what if or the examples put in front of me, like, everybody's has certain interests or values or opinions. I definitely want to have every scenario put in front of me and so I can just at least absorb it and digest it. Does it make sense, like, if we have a meeting in January to kind of just tackle one of these options to just really dive in and get to know it and intimate and make a proper decision on it? Then we can take the next option.
Yeah, so Jim, yeah, I think it's a good idea that I'm not sure we can go through that on any one that we want to propose for the June warrant. We have to look at on January 2nd, finalize it, give it it meets it's consistent with our comprehensive plan. So then it can continue down the path of what all the things that have to happen in order to get a warrant before the voters.
Yeah,
So I think that's right. I mean, maybe we can get some leeway with Lori and move it into January.
Yeah.
I have a hard time seeing that we're going to get anywhere on number 2. Because
I just think it's a big issue,
right?
and
We've spent a lot of time talking about that just amongst the 5 of us, and then we got to convince
the whole town.
1,500 voters, right?
And
talk to
Jim,
them
don't
about it.
take Jim, don't take it the wrong way. I hear what you're saying, but I'll tell you, the only joke I always talk about with all the work that I do and all the towns I do is that developers stay up all night trying to figure out their ways
out.
around the rules.
Absolutely.
Well,
That's
it's,
what
I
they
mean,
do.
I
So-
listen, they that's their business.
Of course,
like-
Well,
like, you
Yeah,
can't
sometimes
discredit
those-
them for want to make money and they want to.
Oh no!
It's their
no!
business,
It's just
like whatever.
they'll always come up with some way to figure out how to get around whatever we put in place.
Yeah.
Right, how to
I'm not
build 'em.
discrediting. They're making business. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
evil people. They're
Of course not.
So
I work with a lot of them, and I
Right.
say that to them. I say, you guys stay up all night trying to figure out how to beat us.
yeah, they got to
Um,
put food on their table too. So
Right? Absolutely.
that would be my suggestion. I don't know how that tackles because it's just there's a lot of opinions, and I just don't know how we shove 5 pounds of I'm turd in a 2-pound bag to get it all.
Who? Excuse me. Who is the town's attorney?
Amy Chow,
Amy Chow.
Oh, so you okay?
Woodward.
So
I mean, Drummond.
Drummond Woodsum. So I work a lot with Leah Ration. She is Arundel's attorney, and I know that they have spent a lot of time on this whole law. And I've talked with Leah a lot about it. It may not be a bad idea at some point in the shorter term to see if you could have Amy or Leah come in and talk with you as well as myself, having done. They did a yeoman's job at actually poking holes in the law when it was going through the process, and had lots and lots of questions that couldn't be answered. I mean, they put their whole team on it. So that might be something you want to do as well.
Yeah, I just don't think the legislator did us any favors by putting this out there and then there's nothing. So now, like we said, we're up against people selecting out.
Right, but again, does it benefit us to just say, well, we're gonna be pragmatic and take our time and make the right decision on our town, and maybe that doesn't get to the warrant. Maybe it just doesn't. What's the con to that?
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
What's the con?
Exactly. Well, I think that goes to the point, Jim. Originally, we were trying to, originally we were trying to meet the state's mandate, but because there's no stick, from the state. You know, towns are going slow, you
Yep.
know, disregarding, canceling votes. voting.
I'd feel better as a representative to take my time, make the proper decision for my town as opposed to
Yeah, I
Well,
agree.
it
not,
won't- It won't, it is so different and complicated that it won't pass.
Yeah.
If unless we can articulate things and
Right.
answer questions to the
Right.
100th degree, of which, like we talked about, you know, the people here, we couldn't, we're still, I bet if you called me up an hour from now and asked me a question, I might give you the wrong answer, you
Yeah.
know?
No doubt.
So if I could
I'd
ask-
deal with it as well.
So if I could ask the members of the GPC, we've talked about three different things. We didn't really dive deep into the third one, but we talked about the ADUs, which from my understanding, all we have to do is do some drafting on how we're gonna handle the detached ADUs, right? Are you guys comfortable with having that language put in by Lee J and then having a vote on that change as whether or not it's consistent with the comprehensive plan on January 2nd?
I
So
think we
that
should
that's
be, yeah.
something we could put forward to the voters that here's a change, so we'll comply with the ADU portion of LD 2003. You guys comfortable with that?
I think
Yep.
we would be able to explain it, talk to it.
Mhm.
And I think it gives the residents something to, almost a lot of people, some positive things. There are some negatives, like if all the ADUs can pop up in the port, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's a
but they,
negative.
but our requirement is that they're rental units, that, you know, that you're living in, right? They're not, you can't
6
rent them
months.
out for
Yeah,
at least 6 months. Yeah, but you can't rent them out every week.
Right.
So,
right, but
Right,
that's still
so-
gonna potentially, uh, not double, but, cause not every property is gonna build one, but it's gonna increase traffic, it's gonna increase
Certain
everything.
neighborhoods, yeah.
I honestly think it's not gonna increase anything. I don't think anyone's gonna build one of those.
Oh,
Maybe one or two, and it won't be many. I wouldn't think.
so,
Let's start a poll.
Lee, how
But-
does that work with our permitting? Do
It-
you,
it-
is
it-
that another bottle choke point
They,
permitting can
It-
limit?
we can't
Um,
apply the growth permits to that.
Correct. You can't apply the growth permits. So if someone comes in and wants a building permit to do it, as long as they meet all of the standards, the setbacks. And you know, when we build in the stormwater issue and that sort of thing,
Right.
then they could get a permit
Go ahead.
to build it.
Right.
There's nothing that is gonna slow that process down.
But
What,
that's complying with the state.
what's
what-
the, reasoning behind a 6-month rental versus a year?
Good question. That was what we chose at the time it was written.
Well,
So
it was,
right.
I think also the premise behind it too was, the snowbirds that spend 6 months in a day down in Florida.
or seasonal people like I can go and rent
Yeah.
their place in the wintertime and then they come back. So it's,
Right.
if I'm only there 6 months.
But yeah, so
they come home.
it's still, when you think about it though, the worst case scenario is every 6 months there's somebody new living there.
I'm
It's-
sure there's a
Well,
lot of those.
It's just not like,
It
and
it
they
already
still have to provide the
exists.
off-street parking and so forth. They can't, they gotta have the parking on site and all the rest.
It already exists now that a lot of people who wanna live here year round and can't afford to buy, can't find year-round rentals because of exactly this, the
Right.
the summer
And-
people take them and then
And w-
they're broken up. So I don't know. I think we should look more carefully at the year contract.
You know, it'd be interesting put together like, a matrix for each one of these threes of the same type of stuff, does it impact parking? Does it impact, water, runoff? Does it, impact traffic or some, whatever the metrics are? And then we would be able to quickly go across each one and say, we took care of it in the ordinance, we took care of the ordinance, this is gonna give a different look and feel, this is gonna increase
Right.
traffic, this is gonna have a parking problem in the, in the growth area in the port, we can't do anything about it, just so that we could, I think that would, might help us understand at a,
Yeah.
like, almost like a cliff sheet. And be able to
But-
stare at it and
Yeah,
then
you-
articulate what it means to the town,
But-
look and
Yeah,
feel.
I mean, the ADU one is actually current right now. There's nothing that's stopping anyone from building it today,
Correct.
right? There isn't,
Correct.
there's nothing. So it's not really, matter of fact, we're putting a little more beef into it because we're gonna deal with stormwater and we're gonna deal with the
Design.
construction
Yeah.
of the detached building. But right
Yeah.
now, every one of those houses down there could build one.
Well, the only thing that there's a
So-
restriction against it right now, if you don't have the area coverage. So right now, if you don't have the space for it by our lot size ordinance, you wouldn't be able to put one in, but what we just had gone through is like down in the port, if they're non-conforming, they don't have the space and they can still squeeze one in with the setbacks, they can go in and put one. So that's the difference. Before we were blocking those. Now that gets taken away from us. We will have more, this will
Well-
be a density increase one for us. Is that
Um,
right? Lee?
That,
Seems
that
so.
is correct with the ADU piece. That is correct.
But that's state law.
That's right.
That's state law. So we're not making any change to our ordinance. Current
Well,
ordinance.
yes, we are.
Right. Other than putting some specifications around what that detach is.
No,
Correct. And the
But they're allowed
stormwater,
in every zone currently.
wherever residential development
Right.
is,
And currently we
yes.
have that in there. It's allowed in every zone. At one point it wasn't. It is. It's allowed in every
So
zone,
Yeah,
right?
but we
And-
have, but don't we have requirements for, like, right now, if you went to the planning board and you were in the port and you said, I want an ADU, and you walked in, would the planning board would say, hey, you already exceeded your lot size coverage, you don't have the space to build one, it's a no. Right now,
You-
we can say no still, right?
no.
They-
No, it's a by right under the
Yeah,
law,
so right.
So. the
under what
ADU
law? Under
State
this new
law.
LD,
under LD 2003.
So you
whether or
don't
not.
have-
Sorry. Whether or not we do anything,
Well, no, I mean, if you,
Well, we have it in place.
you,
That's the
you
thing.
already have it in place. I think this was probably something Warner put in place, which, because it was an easy put in place at the time. And it complies today with LD 2003.
All right, so
So
we're,
so
okay, so
We're
our,
gonna tweak it to address a couple of these design issues in the stormwater, but everything else is in place with that part of the law.
okay, so anyone today could walk in and put a on a non-conforming lot, put an ADU in the port.
Yes,
Okay, well then there's really, so that's actually an easy one then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we're actually putting a little more parameters around what they can actually do.
Yeah,
Right.
you can't flood out your neighbor.
You can't play it out in neighbors, and you gotta have some type of design criteria consistent with what's there.
Hmm.
So Dan, is that what you were suggesting we talked to kind of get squared away in January and kind of put forth?
at least
Just
gonna
that
give us
one
some language.
item?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
So
Leah's
that's-
gonna give us,
okay.
he's gonna give us that, so that will allow us to look at on January 2nd. If we can get more time from the town to allow us to review, then I'll push it. But right now, our deadline is January 5th. So if we could have something like that and look at it on January 2nd, and hopefully by then we'll know whether we can go into February like we used to or not. But at least we would have one thing we can look at, and we can show due diligence that we were attempting to comply with LD 2003. But we're gonna need more time, certainly on the second one, to come up with something. The third one, I'm a bit more comfortable with, because it's a development, has to go through our whole planning board subdivision regs. And it's pretty specific requirements within the law. And because it's limited to a growth area that has access to city water and sewer. You know, there's not a lot of that land available. There's land there for sure, but there's not a lot of that land available. And they would still have to they'd have to make it 51% affordable housing units.
I
So
think
here's
that one, I
here's the
think would-
question. Here's the question, and Liz brought it up. And I've really been thinking about it. And again, I think this is an Amy Chow question, because the law doesn't say that you can't be more restrictive than the law, just like home rule with anything. The state sets out, a base set of standards, and if the town wants to be more restrictive, the town can be more restrictive. So the question is, and I don't know what the answer is, can you require the affordability of those units to be 90 years if that's what you're currently requiring versus the 30 years?
That's a great question we should ask, and I would say we put it in and have
Because
somebody
it's
tell
more
us we can't.
restrictive, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's more
it's
restrictive.
more restrictive.
Absolutely.
It's
I
more
would agree
restrictive,
with
but
that.
it keeps the whole purpose of affordable housing.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Right. No, absolutely.
It's consistent with the spirit of the law as well.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I think you can do that with other things like shoreline zoning. Like if the state's, 250 setback, you can do, the town can do 125 if they want,
Right.
and then you can talk about a variance with the town to, if you have a lot that's non-conforming to, get a larger setback. But
I think number
There is,
3 for a
Go ahead.
voting part, I think while 3 is probably clearer, because I think the legislature took a lot of time in delineating 3, writing it up. I think that's the one that that's the one that will change look and feel. And I think that's one we potentially will have trouble with the vote.
Yeah.
Liz,
That's-
this is
so,
Paul.
so that'd be one that we should ask for additional time to review,
Yes.
to see if
Because-
we can foster an ordinance change, by say middle of February and still push it through for June. If we can't,
Well,
we can't.
I
But
think
if-
part of it
but-
is too, Dan, we have to think through, like, maybe from Lee or Galen, we can get some ideas of what actually happened in the other towns too, not just
Yeah.
knowing who did what, but, like what were the top 3 things that booted these, Because those are gonna
Hey,
come.
Lee.
back
Yeah.
towards
And
us.
then
Lee, quick question
Yes.
on the affordability. So and the 30-year.
Yes.
So I buy this unit and after 20 years, the kitchen looks like hell, and the bathrooms get run down, and there's been several families in there, and there's no outside support to keep these units looking right, support the condo associations. It's all got to come from the owners, the way this is set up. It's not a federally subsidized project.
Correct.
So I say to myself, as the owner number 4, gee, I need to invest. I like the unit; it's affordable, but I need to put in $20,000 in order to upgrade the kitchen and replace the bathroom. Is the theory that I would be able to recover that because affordability 25 years from now will be sufficient, that I'll be able to recognize a gain and get a return of my investment? Because if I can't get a return of my investment, I'm never going to put any money into it. And then the whole place is going to get run down. They're not going to replace the siding. They're not going to replace the roofs. So how does that?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I don't have the answer. The only thing I'm thinking of is while they did set this up for ownership as well as rental, I think their thought process was focused on the rental piece, and the developer, would having to go in at some point and rehab those. The ownership piece, there's nothing that says that you can recoup any of your above and beyond the price of keeping it affordable, that you can recoup any additional funds from improvements to that property.
Yeah, but why couldn't we do like, you
So-
know, like I have friends that own property near ocean and they lease the property, the people own the building. And within the lease, they're required to maintain upkeep. They can't let it deteriorate, you know? They can't do that. So why wouldn't that be a stipulation of a lease that we would do as a town to
I don't know
Put
that we
forth.
have that authority to do that. That's an Amy question.
So here's part of the problem too, is if you read through the survey or the resultant of the market analysis that they did on the first village parcel, big report, part of it was for affordable housing. And if you looked at the cost of developing affordable housing, the town would have had to bear the cost of each unit. So this goes back to Paul's point, you know, if a developer goes in there and is capped below market value with today's material costs,
Yep.
these things are not going to be built high end. They're not going to be built medium end. They're going to be built not to last 30 years.
I don't disagree. I think,
So that's
think
sort of
that-
yeah, it's a little bit of a conundrum here, because I think, Lee, what I'm trying to say is that it had to be subsidized. You know, when they did the first analysis for the village parcel and putting on affordable housing, it would be subsidized by the town, by the residents.
and I think a lot of that, excuse me, is gonna be driven by the developer trying to figure out how many units can I get on a particular parcel, even with the 2.5 times the density, so that if 51% of those units are affordable, the others are market rate. And what is that market rate target number, so that I can continue to have them subsidize or support the affordable units? That's a whole developer-driven piece that we don't really have control over.
So the state has
and honestly, they
mentioned-
should figure that out because I have to pay for my own siding. I don't want to be as a taxpayer. I want my taxes low, and I don't want to pay for somebody else's siding.
Absolutely.
So
No, but
especially with houses
con-
going for $900,000 right now, that's
Yep.
and we're
Right,
already
the
and we
concept-
have a lot of conservation property that's off the tax roll. So,
Yep.
So Lee, they put this in place without
Yep.
any. So there's requirements, but there's no offerings from the state for the
None.
developers.
The only thing they offered was that they were giving certain towns $5,000 and
Yeah, I saw
other
that.
towns $10,000 for our efforts to help towns get it put in place. Other than that, there's nothing relevant to the actual law that says, you're gonna get any help.
But
The only other
their
help
guess
you could-
is that their guess is that, and they could be completely off and nothing could get built, but their guess is that the units will be, the developments will be able to support the construction of these affordable units by charging the people who are buying the market rate ones. And the market, it's either going to work or it's not going to work in the area, and the developers will be the one making those decisions. Can I, sell 51% affordable? And it's in their interest to make them look right and feel right to fit into that neighborhood. If they make them look like schlock, then it's going to detract people from buying the high end ones.
Well,
Because
the
they're not
only
going to want to
other-
live in a neighborhood that doesn't look right.
Right. The only other mechanism that's in place, and here's where it would really get complicated, and we don't want to go down that rabbit hole tonight anyway, is doing an affordable housing tax increment financing district.
Right.
And then you'd have to negotiate with the developer that he's getting a kickback of so much of that money. And you'd have to have the contract where he would have to put it back into those units. But that would get very complicated, but there is the affordable housing TIF law that could kick in.
Thanks.
Hey, great
And
conversation.
Galen's got
It
his
went-
hand up.
Yeah,
This one actually went longer than I thought it would.
right.
Which is good. I
Says
mean,
the
there's a
guy in
lot
the
of
car.
good conversation and good points. But we are hitting our 8 o'clock time, and I want to be cognizant of everybody's time and commitment. So I think what I heard is that we're okay with if maybe having the ADU upgraded terminology around the construction of the detached home and the stormwater runoff management as something we can review on January 2nd and make a decision whether or not we feel it's appropriate to put it to the voters and that it's consistent with the plan. And that the other ones will need to table and discuss in our January meetings and likely February meetings. So I think we ought to plan on meeting at least both first and third Tuesdays of those months
Of January.
to work through this.
Right? January and February, 1st and 3rd.
Yes. Yeah, first and third Tuesdays, whatever dates
think
those are.
that's the plan.
Second. Yeah, second and the
16.
16th, and then whatever they are in February. Does that work with everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
Sure.
Yep.
Thanks, Lee.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense,
very-
Mary Beth?
Yeah, and Dan, if you want to just give me a ring, and
Yep.
I'll send you my phone number, and then just send me a text or something, then we can get some time with Lori and walk through.
Yeah, I'm traveling the rest of this week. I'll get my daughter from college, and then I'll be
Yep.
back in town next week.
Yeah, that's good. I'm tied up the whole week anyways too, so good.
And
Alright.
can I just make the suggestion again that like if anybody like the questions that people have so it can benefit me so I can understand
What?
all the sides of this. I really want to absorb all the things that people are thinking about. So if anybody,
Sure.
wants to share that, please do.
But yeah, let's bring that to that's the other thing I should make a note of, just as kind of reminder. We need to conduct all our business really on the public airways. And minimize how much we do via email because the public can't see that. So why don't we all jot down those questions and then we can share them.
Yep.
On the second.
Also, if somebody could bring a map, I mean, if it's just attached to our agenda or whatever, of the current zones,
Zones, sure. We'll get that.
so that when
It's
we
available.
talk about a certain area, we have the details of what we're actually talking about.
Yep, that's available. All right. Here, any other discussion? All right, hearing none. I'll take a motion. Paul, as the normal.
I move we adjourn at 8:03.
Second.
All right, thank you all very much. Thank you all out there who are listening and hearing no we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Question, so future meetings, January 2nd and 16 and February 6 and 20?
Yes.
That works.
Okay.
Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
You too. Thanks.
Good.
Nice to meet
Take
you.
care all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.